The Xylo's training grounds were a monument to optimistic bureaucracy. Carved from the sterile, silver dust of a tidally locked moon, the facility glittered under the perpetual twilight of its gas giant parent, Xylo's Prime. It was the Galactic Concordance's finest achievement in cooperative military doctrine, a place where 100 different species could bleed, sweat, and fail together in simulated harmony, ensuring that if they ever had to do it for real, they'd do it as a unified front. The air in the central observation dome, a vast bubble of transparent plasteel, hummed with the professional respect of beings who understood the grim calculus of war, regardless of their biology. This cycle, the exercise was the Crimson Gauntlet, a name chosen by a marketing committee to sound both fearsome and inspiring. It was, by all accounts, the most grueling 10-day, squad-level endurance test ever conceived. It was designed to push every participant to the absolute limit of their species' unique capabilities. High Analyst Xyler, of the crystalline Cathar, adjusted his position on the observation dais. His faceted body, a living sculpture of silicon and quartz, refracted the dome's holographic displays into 1,000 tiny rainbows. He communicated not with sound, but with modulated psionic resonance, a cool wave of pure logic that washed over the minds of those around him. The variables are excessive, he projected to his colleague. True stress testing requires controlled stimuli, not orchestrated chaos. The margin for data corruption is significant. Beside him, Drone Prime 7 Chit 4 of the Vexian hive clicked its primary mandibles in polite disagreement. An elegant bipedal insectoid, its chitinous exoskeleton was the deep, iridescent blue of its home hive's sigil. Its connection to the Vexian overmind was constant, a silent stream of data that made it both an individual and a nexus for 1 billion other minds. Chaos is the prime resource of the battlefield, High Analyst, it chittered, its translated voice a crisp, synthesized baritone. The efficiency of a unit is measured by its ability to impose order upon that chaos. The gauntlet is an ideal metric. Their attention, like that of most observers, was drawn to a small notation on the master roster, participant species 734, Homo sapiens, designation, human, squad. Death Watch, first expeditionary. Xyler focused a sensor array on the human squad's designated preparation bay. 4 figures were visible. They were unimpressive, soft, symmetrical to the point of being biologically redundant. They hailed from a world officially catalogued as a Class 7 death world, a term that inspired a sort of morbid academic fascination. A world with tectonic instability, extreme weather patterns, a chaotic axial tilt, and an biosphere locked in a perpetual, violent competition. It was considered a miracle they'd achieved spaceflight at all, let alone been granted probationary concordance membership. Their biological composition is inefficient. Xyler resonated, his thoughts tinged with a logician's pity. Aqueous high-maintenance endoskeletons, limited sensory input, no natural armor. They are remarkably fragile. Their resource cost per unit is high. 7 Chit 4 agreed, its multifaceted eyes analyzing the human's heat signatures. High-energy diet, mandatory rest cycles, susceptibility to atmospheric variance. The hive would not find such a drone model optimal. Down in their bay, Death Watch was oblivious to the high-minded dismissal. Staff Sergeant Eva Ristova, a woman whose face looked like it had been carved from granite by a tired artist, slammed a fresh power cell into her pulse rifle. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept over her squad. Sound off. Gear check is in the house, Corporal Sam Jones said, patting a medkit on his thigh. His grin was a little too wide, a little too easy. It was the kind of grin that made new recruits nervous and veterans feel right at home. Stocked up on happy juice, bandages, and a whole lot of get up and walk it off. Goliath Online, rumbled Private First Class Marcus Thorne. He was a mountain in human form, his heavy particle cannon looking less like a crew-served weapon and more like a personal accessory. His calm was absolute, a deep well of stillness that nothing seemed to touch. He was checking the seams on his armor plating with the meticulous care of a watchmaker. "Wraith is green," chirped Private Lee May. She was a hummingbird of a person, her fingers dancing over a datapad that was synced to her helmet's advanced sensor suite. Got a full topographical overlay of the first sector, and I've already hacked the public comms channel for the Observer Lounge. They're talking about the quality of the nutrient paste in the VIP section. Rostova's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. Let M. They can talk, we'll work. You all know the score. This isn't about winning. It's about finishing. They're testing us, the whole species. They think we're a fluke, a bunch of squishy monkeys who got lucky with fire. Our job is to show them what a monkey can do when it's cornered. No heroics. Stick together, stay quiet, and do what we do best. Suffer, Doc Jones offered. Survive, Rostova corrected. The rest is just details. The final briefing was held in a grand amphitheater, presided over by General Vorlag, a Xylotian of immense stature and solemnity. His species was saurian, with pebbled gray skin and a deep, resonant voice that commanded instant attention. He stood before a holographic map of the training ground, a brutal landscape of jagged canyons, acid swamps, and crumbling alien ruins. "Contingents," he boomed, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "Welcome to the Crimson Gauntlet. For the next 10 standard days, this world is your enemy. The environment is your enemy. The automated defense systems are your enemy. At times, you will be each other's enemy. Your objective is not victory, but endurance. Your performance will be logged, your biometrics streamed, your tactics analyzed. This is the ultimate test of the modern galactic soldier." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the various squads. The Cathar contingent stood motionless, their crystalline forms absorbing the briefing with perfect fidelity. The Vexian squad of 4 drones moved as one, their antennae twitching in perfect synchronicity. The Luminians, beings of pure energy, hovered in their gleaming encounter suits, their presence a cool spot in the room's ambient temperature. Then his eyes landed on the 4 humans. They stood at ease, but not relaxed. There was a coiled tension in their posture, a way of watching everything at once that was subtly different from the disciplined focus of the other soldiers. He gave them a curt nod. "We also extend a formal welcome to the first human contingent from Earth. May your performance bring honor to your species." Commander Volek, the human diplomatic liaison, puffed up with pride from his seat in the observation gallery. He was a politician, not a soldier, and saw this as a grand coming-out party for humanity, a chance to prove they belonged. As the squads were dismissed, Rostova leaned in towards her team. "You hear that? Bring honor. That's politician speak for don't embarrass us. Let's get to it." The first 72 hours of the Crimson Gauntlet were a symphony of controlled violence. Automated turrets rose from the silver dust to spit lasers. Nanoswarms were released into the canyons, designed to test the integrity of environmental seals. The Cathar squad moved with eerie precision, using their psionic abilities to predict turret activation sequences and create shimmering kinetic barriers. The Vexians were a blur of motion, scaling sheer cliffs and overwhelming objectives with a speed and coordination that was breathtakingly efficient. Death Watch, by contrast, looked sloppy. They didn't move in perfect formation. They used hand signals that seemed crude compared to the silent psionic or data-linked communication of the others. They took cover behind natural rock formations instead of deploying standardized energy shields. They spent long periods of time completely motionless, just watching. To the observers, their progress was competent but unremarkable, unconventional, almost primitive. They were surviving, but they weren't excelling in any of the established metrics. On day 3, having secured a shallow cave overlooking a strategically vital choke point, Rostova called a halt. The simulated sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the canyons. "All right, chow time," she grunted, shrugging off her rucksack. "May, you're on first watch." The ritual began, one so familiar it was second nature. They pulled out drab, vacuum-sealed pouches labeled MRE. Thorne got chili macaroni. Doc Jones got vegetable crumbles with pasta. Rostova got pork sausage patty. "Anyone want to trade for the pork patty?" she asked, holding it up with a look of profound disgust. "No way, Sarge," Doc laughed, tearing open his own pouch. "I've seen things crawl away from that one." Just grunted and ripped open his chili mac, already spooning the thick, reddish-brown paste into his mouth, cold. Li Mei, perched on a rock a few meters away, was fiddling with one of the flameless ration heaters. A small hiss of chemical steam rose from the pouch as she activated it, the smell of warm plastic and preservatives faintly tainting the sterile moon air. To them, it was a moment of mundane respite. A taste of home, however bland and processed. It was fuel, nothing more. In the observation dome, Drone Prime 7 Chit 4's head tilted. Its optical sensors were zoomed in on the human encampment, a drone the size of a fly hovering silently nearby, sampling the air. Curious, 7 Chit 4 chittered, flagging the activity for its Cathar colleague. The human squad is initiating a refueling cycle. I am detecting anomalous chemical signatures emanating from their sustenance packets. Specify anomalous, Xyler projected, his mental voice a cool query. His own species nourished themselves by absorbing specific light frequencies, a clean and efficient process. The concept of consuming solid matter was already distastefully messy, requesting remote spectrographic analysis. 7 Chit 4 announced to the dome's central computer. A moment later, a holographic display shimmered into existence between them, scrolling with complex chemical data. 7 Chit 4's mandibles clicked rapidly as it cross-referenced the information with the Concordance's extensive xenobiological database. The clicking slowed, then stopped. A low, agitated hum began to emanate from its thorax, a sign of network-wide cognitive dissonance. "Hi, analyst." 7 Chit 4's synthesized voice was suddenly strained, losing its crisp edge. "The analysis is alarming." "Elucidate," Xyler prompted, his psionic field rippling with focused curiosity. "The primary compound in the ration designated chili macaroni contains capsaicinoids at a concentration that would trigger a severe neurotoxic reaction in 92% of known carbon-based life forms. It is, for all intents and purposes, a defensive poison developed by Terran flora." Xyler processed this. "A mild poison, perhaps, consumed as a show of fortitude. Some species engage in such rituals." "Negative," 7 Chit 4 stated flatly. "The sodium content across all samples exceeds safe metabolic limits by a factor of 5. The preservatives are a cocktail of complex benzoates and sorbates. By Concordance xenobiological hazard standards, this material would be classified as a level 4 carcinogen and a moderate mutagen. It is, scientifically speaking, a slow-acting poison designed to disrupt cellular reproduction." The drone swiveled its head to look at Xyler. "Consuming this industrial byproduct should induce violent metabolic rejection. Cramping, cellular lysis, synaptic misfire, eventual system collapse." They both turned their attention back to the live feed. Thorne had finished his portion and was now using a piece of hardened bread substitute to scrape the last of the toxic sludge from the bottom of the pouch. Doc Jones was complaining that his vegetable crumbles tasted like sadness and cardboard. Rostova was grimly forcing down the sausage patty, her expression one of pure, unadulterated duty. "And yet, they appear to be enjoying it," Xyler projected, a thread of something that felt disturbingly like confusion entering his logical stream. "The large one, Thorne, is consuming a second packet. They are not just consuming it," 7 Chit 4 corrected, its voice low. "Their biometric readouts, which have been stable, show a slight increase in heart rate and endorphin levels. Their bodies are reacting to the neurotoxin not as a threat, but as a stimulant. They are conditioning themselves to enjoy poison." A luminary, encased in its elegant, humanoid suit of polished chrome, drifted closer. Its voice was a series of melodic chimes translated into gentle speech. "What is the disturbance, Drone Prime?" "The humans," 7 Chit 4 said, gesturing a multi-jointed limb at the screen. "They are eating poison, willingly. For sustenance." Luminary observed the display, its suit's optical sensors glowing a soft blue. It perceived the universe as a flow of energy, and the MREs were a chaotic, jarring signature. How crude. Their biology is a riot of conflicting processes. To willingly introduce more chaos, it is illogical. It is unsettling. This was the first true data point that fell outside any known model. It wasn't about tactics or strength. It was about a fundamental biological divergence that hinted at something deeply wrong. The observers watched as Li Mei finished her heated meal, sighed contentedly, and turned her attention back to her scanners. They were not just soldiers. They were creatures that had mastered their own hostile biology to such a degree that they could casually dine on substances that would kill a lesser organism. And the most terrifying part was the sheer, unthinking normalcy of it all. It was just lunch. On day 5, the Crimson Gauntlet entered its most infamous phase, the Maelstrom. Without warning, the Central Command AI, in its infinite wisdom, unleashed a relentless 12-hour simulated artillery barrage on every active sector. It wasn't about direct hits. The exercise's safeties were too robust for that. It was a psychological and sensory assault. The sky, previously a placid canvas of twilight and stars, was torn asunder by silent flashes of light, followed microseconds later by ground-shaking, bone-jarring concussive waves. The air itself became a physical weapon, a deafening, continuous cacophony of simulated explosions, the screech of hypersonic shells, and a deep, subsonic hum designed to induce disorientation and nausea. The very dust on the moon's surface danced and vibrated. For 12 solid hours, there would be no peace, no silence, only the unceasing, brutal lullaby of total war. In the observation dome, General Vorlag stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his reptilian face a mask of stern focus. He monitored the status of every squad, his eyes flicking between dozens of holographic displays. This was the true test. Brute force could be countered, tactics could be learned, but psychological resilience was innate. The Vexian squad, as expected, had reacted with perfect efficiency. They had excavated a deep, narrow burrow and entered a low-energy trance, their collective consciousness filtering the sensory input to a manageable level. A logical, resource-saving response. The Cathar were using their psionic abilities to generate a dampening field around their position. It shimmered in the visual feed, a bubble of relative metaphysical quiet in the heart of the storm. Yet their biometric data showed signs of strain. Their crystalline structures were resonating with the constant vibrations, and the psionic effort was clearly taxing. Logic could only insulate a mind from pure chaos for so long. The Luminians, in counter-suits, were working at over 200% of their rated capacity. Intricate energy patterns washed over their polished shells, actively canceling out the chaotic frequencies, transmuting the raw sonic violence into harmless light and heat. To them, the barrage was an assault of pure, ugly energy, and they were repulsed by its crudeness. They endured, but it was an ordeal. Then, Vorlag's gaze settled on the feed from Death Watch. He blinked, his nictitating membranes sliding across his dark eyes. He magnified the image. The humans had taken refuge under a deep, rocky overhang, a smart, if obvious, tactical choice. The entrance was partially blocked by their rucksacks. The heavy weapons specialist, Thorn, was on watch, sitting with his back against the rock wall, his particle cannon resting across his lap. He was staring out into the maelstrom, his expression unreadable but his posture alert. Vorlag checked his biometrics, heart rate elevated but steady, a soldier on guard. Normal. He then shifted the drone's internal sensor suite to thermal and acoustic, peering past Thorn into the small alcove. What he saw made no sense. Rostova, Doc Jones, and Li Mei were asleep, not in a trance, not in a state of shock or sensory overload. Their thermal signatures were stable, their breathing deep and rhythmic. The drone's sensitive microphone, filtered for everything but their immediate vicinity, picked up the gentle sound of Jones snoring softly, a sound almost completely buried by the apocalyptic din outside. Rostova was curled on her side, using her pack as a pillow. Li Mei was sprawled on her back, her mouth slightly agape. They were, by every metric available to the most advanced sensor suite in the galaxy, sleeping soundly. "Status report on the human squad," Vorlag commanded, his voice tight. Zyler, the Cathar analyst, was already studying the data, his psionic field rippling with intense concentration. "General, the human subjects designated Rostova, Jones, and may have entered a standard biological rest cycle. Specifically, analysis of their brainwave patterns indicates they are cycling between Stage 3 and REM sleep. It is deep, restorative sleep." A wave of disbelief washed over the observation deck. 7-Chit-4 approached the display, its head cocked. "That is not possible. Our acoustic sensors confirm ambient decibel levels in their sector are sustained at 190. Even with auditory dampeners built into their helmets, the concussive force alone should be causing microtrauma to their inner ears and vestibular system. The persistent subsonic vibrations are tuned to disrupt synaptic function in most organic brains. It should be agonizing. Their technology is more advanced than we presumed, a civilian analyst offered. Some form of personal sensory deprivation field. Negative. Li Mei's voice suddenly crackled over the hacked public channel, startling everyone. No fancy tech. Sarge just told us to get some shut-eye. You can get used to anything if you're tired enough. She sounded amused. A moment later, the channel went dead. She had made her point. The luminary observer drifted forward, its melodic voice now holding a note of deep concern. We do not interpret this as sleep, not as a sentient being understands it. To willingly disengage the conscious mind in the midst of such an overwhelming sensory and physical threat, it is an act of surrendering the self to chaos. It is a precursor to psychological collapse, to madness. No rational being would choose to be so absent. Or it is a display, Zyler projected, exploring a different logical path, a form of psychological warfare. They feign imperviousness to intimidate their opposition. A calculated projection of strength. The biometrics do not support that hypothesis. 7-Chit-4 countered, its mandibles clicking with agitation. Deceit requires conscious effort, which would be reflected in their neural activity. Their neural activity is genuinely, authentically at rest. The hive can only conclude one thing: their consciousness does not perceive this environment as a mortal threat. Their threat assessment parameters are broken. Vorlag stared at the screen. He watched Thorne's shift end. The big man gently nudged Rostova, who woke instantly without grogginess or disorientation. She blinked, stretched, and took his place on watch. Thorne then laid his massive frame down on the rocky ground and within minutes was as deeply asleep as the others had been. They were taking turns. It was a procedure, a routine. The idea that they were simply sleeping because they were tired and had been ordered to was so alien, so fundamentally contrary to every known species' survival instinct, that it couldn't be the correct answer. The observers cast about for explanations, each more elaborate and terrifying than the last. That they were non-sentient biological automatons, that they possessed a hive mind of their own, one that could simply switch off individual nodes, that their tolerance for suffering was so absolute that an apocalyptic bombardment registered as little more than a mild annoyance. The truth was far simpler and far more horrifying. These creatures came from a world so violent that they had evolved the ability to find peace in the heart of a hurricane. War was not an aberration to them. It was their natural habitat. And in the silent, sterile dome of Xylos, that quiet understanding began to curdle into a very specific kind of fear. The final 48 hours of the Crimson Gauntlet were a desperate, grinding push. The ultimate objective was a fortified bunker complex atop a plateau known as the Widow's Peak. Automated defenses were at maximum intensity, and the AI was now actively using tactical, adaptive logic against the remaining squads. Death Watch was pinned down. They were moving up a narrow, scree-filled ravine that offered the only covered approach to the summit. Laser fire, precise and deadly, stitched the air above them, kicking up clouds of silver dust and superheated rock. "Thorne, we need to suppress that nest on the upper ridge," Rostova yelled over the comm, her voice tight with exertion. 200 meters, elevation 45. "On it, Sarge," the big man's voice rumbled back. He shifted his position, moving from behind one boulder to a larger one a few meters ahead, trying to get a clear line of fire. That was when the AI, in its infinite cruelty, triggered a targeted seismic charge on the cliff face above him. It wasn't a direct hit, but it didn't need to be. The rock shuddered violently. A shower of pebbles cascaded down, followed by an avalanche of heavy, jagged stones. "Thorne. Look out," Li Mei screamed. He twisted, trying to throw himself back, but he wasn't fast enough. A boulder the size of an engine block crashed down, catching his left leg with a sickening, wet crunch that was audible even over the chaos of the firefight. Thorne's world dissolved into a universe of pure, white-hot agony. It was an all-consuming fire that raced up his leg, into his spine, and exploded behind his eyes. He looked down. His lower leg was trapped, bent at an impossible angle. A shard of white bone, slick with blood, jutted out from the torn fabric of his combat trousers and the splintered armor beneath. Well, a strangely calm, distant part of his brain observed, "This is bad." On the observation deck, a red alert klaxoned to life. Thorne's biomonitor, streamed directly to the main display, flatlined on several key indicators before rebooting and showing a catastrophic trauma warning. Pain indicators spiked into the highest possible percentile. Blood pressure plummeted. It was the kind of injury that, for any concordant soldier, meant one thing. The suit's internal stasis field would activate, encasing the limb in a protective shell, and a medical extraction alert would be automatically dispatched. The soldier was out of the fight, mission over, but on the ground something else was happening. Doc Jones moved with a speed that was terrifyingly calm. He reached Thorne's side, his eyes taking in the mangled limb, the protruding bone, the spreading pool of blood. "Ristova, cover us!" he yelled. Then he reached down to Thorne's wrist-mounted biomonitor, and with a few deft taps on the screen, manually overrode the system and deactivated the extraction alert. In the dome, a collective gasp went through the observers. General Vorlag leaned forward, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. What is he doing? He has disabled the medical failsafe. The Vexian chief medical officer, a specialist drone designated 9-6, was present in the dome. Its synthesized voice was sharp with disbelief. By all protocols, that soldier should be rendered unconscious by systemic shock. The pain signals flooding his neural pathways are beyond our scale. Disabling the alert is a death sentence. Doc Jones ignored protocols written light years away. He ripped a syringe from his medkit. It was filled with a milky fluid. "Bite down on something, big man," he said, his voice low and steady. He unhesitatingly plunged the needle into the thick muscle of Thorne's neck. Thorne let out a choked gasp, his body convulsing. His knuckles were white where he gripped the rock. What was that substance? 9-6 demanded, its sensors trying and failing to analyze the compound from afar. "High-dose morphine derivative," Commander Volek, the human liaison, supplied from his seat, his voice shaking slightly. "A powerful analgesic, and probably a combat stimulant, to counteract the soporific effects and the shock." The screen, Doc Jones was now at work on the leg. He cut away the fabric, exposing the grisly wound. He poured a clear, antiseptic fluid over the raw flesh and bone, a process that should have been excruciating. Thorne shuddered violently but remained conscious, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth would shatter. Then Doc Jones placed one hand on Thorne's thigh and the other on his ankle. "All right, buddy," he whispered. "On 3. 1, 2. Didn't wait for 3. With a sudden, brutal heave, he forced the lower leg back into alignment. There was a wet, grinding crunch that the drone's microphone picked up with perfect, horrifying fidelity. Thorne screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony that was abruptly cut off as he bit through his own lip. The observers recoiled. The Cathar analyst, Zyler, projected a wave of pure, undiluted nausea that washed over the deck, an involuntary psionic reaction of disgust. "This is not medicine," he broadcasted, his logic shattered. "This is butchery. It is an act of ritualized torture performed on a conscious, suffering being by its own comrade." The luminary's suit flickered, its internal systems struggling to process the sheer biological horror of the scene. The body should not be able to withstand such trauma. The flesh is a delicate machine. This is a perversion. It refuses to acknowledge its own destruction. But it wasn't over. Doc Jones, his work done, expertly wrapped the mangled limb with self-sealing bandages and locked it into place with 2 rigid metallic splints. He patted Thorne's shoulder. "How you feeling, big guy?" Thorne, drenched in sweat, his face pale as death, spat a mouthful of blood onto the silver dust. He took a deep, shuddering breath as the cocktail of drugs flooded his system, turning the roaring fire of pain into a distant, manageable inferno. He looked up at Ristova. "I can't move," he grunted, his voice a strained rasp, "but I can still shoot." Looked at him, then at the ridge. Her decision was instantaneous. "Good enough." She and Doc dragged him, splinted leg and all, into a sitting position against the boulder, propping his heavy weapon on a stable rock in front of him. "Li Mei, spot for him. Doc, you're with me. We're taking that ridge." For the next 2 hours, Thorne provided brutally effective covering fire. His hands were steady, his aim true. He operated his weapon with cold, detached precision, calling out target acquisitions as if he were sitting comfortably at a firing range. They took the objective. They completed the mission. On the observation deck, there was only silence. The battle was won, but something far more important had been lost. They had watched a creature suffer an injury that would have instantly incapacitated any other soldier in the Concordance. They had watched its medic, instead of preserving it, inflict what appeared to be further agony upon it to force it back into a functional state. And they had watched the soldier not only endure it, but embrace it, turning his broken body into a static gun emplacement. They weren't watching a soldier anymore. They were watching a monster, a biological paradox that defied pain, logic, and the fundamental laws of self-preservation. This wasn't resilience. This was something else entirely, and it was terrifying. The Crimson Gauntlet was over. The surviving squads were recuperating in their designated bays, their performances logged for posterity. In the human wing, the atmosphere was relaxed, almost celebratory. Thorne was laid out on a cot, his leg now encased in a proper high-tech medical cast that was knitting his bones back together with accelerated nanoweavers. "Gotta say, Doc," Thorne said, grinning up at the ceiling, "your bedside manner sucks, but you do good work." "Hey, you got a new piercing out of it," Doc Jones shot back, tossing him a cold beer. "Adds character." Watched them, a rare, genuine smile on her face as she cracked open a bottle for herself. "To the easiest damn drill we've ever had," she toasted. The squad laughed and raised their drinks in agreement. Meanwhile, in the main debriefing hall, the mood was funereal. Commander Volek sat in the front row, his dress uniform immaculate, a proud smile fixed on his face. He was expecting a commendation. Death Watch had not only finished, but they had completed the final objective under extreme duress. He was already drafting a triumphant report for high command. General Vorlag stood at the podium. His usual stern professionalism was gone, replaced by a deep, weary gravity. The hall was packed with the highest-ranking observers and officials of the Concordance. "The final analysis of the Crimson Gauntlet is complete," Vorlag began, his voice low and somber. He systematically detailed the performance of the Vexian and Cathar squads, praising their efficiency and discipline. Then his face hardened. "And now, we must address the anomaly. We must discuss the performance of the human contingent, Squad Death Watch." Commander Volek straightened up, beaming. "This was it. The course of the 10-day exercise," Vorlag continued. "The humans displayed behaviors so far outside established biological and psychological norms that they warrant a full, formal review. We have compiled the most egregious data points for your consideration." The main holographic screen flickered to life behind him. Exhibit A. Sustenance as self-poisoning. The chemical breakdown of the human MREs filled the screen. The chief xenobiologist of the Concordance, a gelatinous, multi-lensed being from Cygnus X1, floated to the podium. Its translated voice was a wet, bubbling whisper. "The materials consumed by the human squad are, by any civilized metabolic standard, toxic. They contain a complex blend of neurotoxins, carcinogens, and chemical preservatives that function as industrial-grade bactericides. No sentient organism should be able to derive nourishment from such substances. To do so willingly suggests a biology that is either fundamentally flawed or has evolved to thrive on decay and poison. We have no other species on record with this capability." A nervous murmur went through the assembly. Volek's smile faltered. He started to raise a hand to explain shelf stability and field requirements, but Vorlag was already moving on. Exhibit B. Consciousness within chaos. The screen now showed the haunting footage of Rostova, Jones, and Lee May sleeping peacefully amidst the apocalyptic fury of the maelstrom. The lead psychoacoustic analyst, a delicate avian creature with feathers that ruffled with anxiety, took the stage. "Sentient consciousness is defined by the instinct for self-preservation," it chirped, its voice trembling. "This instinct manifests as a constant state of awareness, particularly in high-threat environments. To willingly enter a state of deep unconsciousness under such conditions is unprecedented. It is a trait we have only ever observed in non-sentient apex predators. Creatures so confident in their dominance, so lacking in natural enemies, that they perceive no environment as a genuine threat. It is the psychology of a thing that does not fear being hunted. The word predator hung in the air, thick and cold. Volek felt a knot of ice form in his stomach. This was going wrong. Horribly wrong. Finally, Vorlag said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Exhibit C, the unbreakable will of broken flesh. The hall was forced to watch the full, unedited, high-definition recording of Thorne's injury. They saw the rock slide, the mangled leg, the protruding bone. They heard the sickening crunch as Doc Jones reset the limb. They heard Thorne's raw scream of agony. And they watched, in stunned silence, as he was propped up and proceeded to operate a heavy weapon for 2 hours. When the footage ended, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the life support systems. The Vexian chief medical officer, 9-6, moved to the center of the floor. The data from this event defies all known biological law, it stated, its synthesized voice cold and precise. The pain signals from such a trauma should have induced irreversible neurogenic shock, leading to coma and likely death. The medic's actions, administering a powerful stimulant alongside an analgesic, were not an act of healing. It was an override. He was rebooting a damaged system, and the soldier continued to function. This is the critical point. His combat effectiveness was unimpaired. 9-6 paused, letting the weight of its words sink in. We have concluded that humans do not experience pain as we understand it. Pain, for a civilized being, is a warning signal that mandates the cessation of activity to preserve the whole. For humans, it appears to be just more data to be processed, information to be compartmentalized and, if necessary, ignored in favor of the mission. It turned to face the entire assembly. This is not the biology of a soldier. This is the biology of a self-repairing weapon that does not register its own damage in any meaningful way. It is a creature that will continue to function, to fight, to kill, until it is physically torn to pieces. A wave of palpable, primal fear washed over the alien delegations. They were no longer seeing brave soldiers from a developing world. They were seeing monsters. Unkillable monsters that ate poison, used bombardments as a sleep aid, and treated wounds that would fell a behemoth as a minor inconvenience. "Wait," Commander Volek finally shouted, jumping to his feet. "You don't understand. It's called adrenaline, endorphins, it's grit, determination. We've been fighting on our planet for millennia. We're tough." His words, meant to be a proud defense, were the final nail in humanity's coffin. His explanation sounded like the boast of a madman, confirming their worst fears. "We've been fighting for millennia." They heard it not as a history of struggle, but as a confession of an entire species addicted to violence. A high-ranking luminary, whose presence had been a silent, calming influence until now, floated to the center of the hall. Its chrome suit seemed to glow with a cold, hard light. Its melodic voice was gone, replaced by a tone as sharp and clear as breaking glass. "For the continued safety and stability of the galactic concordance, I propose an immediate and complete reevaluation of the species Homo sapiens." Its voice rang with an authority that silenced Volek instantly. They are not a developing race to be nurtured into the galactic community. They are a Tier 1 biological and psychological threat. Their paradoxical resilience is a danger to the established order and our understanding of life itself. Made a formal motion, its voice echoing in the horrified silence. "I move that Homo sapiens be reclassified to threat classification, Omega, status, Death World Apex Predator. All future contact is to be governed by Level 5 extreme biological and psychological hazard protocols." Seconded. The call came instantly from the Cathar delegation. General Vorlag, looking shaken to his core, his face pale beneath his gray scales, called for the vote. It was a landslide, near unanimous. Commander Volek sank into his chair, the blood draining from his face, the triumphant report he'd planned turning to ash in his mind. The aftermath was a flurry of terrified, bureaucratic efficiency. On one side of a metaphorical split screen, the Concordance was in crisis mode. Teams of xenophobes and security experts were frantically drafting new protocols. Any ship arriving from human space would face a mandatory 30-day quarantine. All human-made goods, especially foodstuffs, were to be handled only by automated drones or personnel in full HAZMAT gear. A new branch of the diplomatic corps was being created, one specializing in psychological screening for any alien official who would be forced to interact with the monstrously resilient humans. The new Concordance travel guide for Earth would be short. Don't. On the other side of the screen, in their barracks on the silver moon of Xylos, Death Watch was winding down. The beer was gone. Li Mei was already asleep, snoring softly. Doc Jones was cleaning his medical kit with practiced ease. Thorne, his cast-encased leg propped up on a spare crate, was methodically cleaning his particle cannon, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. "You know," he said to Rostova, who was staring out the viewport at the swirling clouds of Xylos Prime. "You were right, Sarge. They worry too much." He patted his cast. "It was just a scratch." Turned, a faint, tired smile on her lips. She picked up an empty bottle, holding it up in a silent, final toast. She thought of the poisoned food, the noisy night, the broken bone. To her, it had been a walk in the park, a vacation compared to campaigns she'd seen. "To the easiest drill we've ever had," she murmured to the empty room. Far away, in a sterile printing facility, a robotic arm was applying a new label to a digital file. The file was labeled Homo sapiens. The label was a stark, blood-red warning, species POSSESSES paradoxical resilience. Do not assess CAPABILITIES by standard biological METRICS. All PREDICTIONS invalid. Approach with extreme caution.